Is there an argument? Is there something we could present to these people that would make them, at the very least, pause and say, that's interesting?
Yeah, sure. When I saw this video's title, All Atheists' Arguments, knowing that this guy is a theist made me pause and say, that's interesting. Now, I haven't actually watched it yet, but I'm ready to see what he says.
Isn't it so frustrating that no matter how hard we try, how good the arguments are, how airtight the defense is for God or Jesus Christ being the Son of God, that people like Christopher Hitchens Dawkins, Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic, or even Ben Shapiro, who's an Orthodox Jew, it can be so frustrating. The rest of us are like, oh my goodness, that's so clear. It's so obvious.
I really don't understand the logic when they say stuff like this. The defense for God isn't even tight itself. So many claim to have proof of God, then cite the Bible, or show some awesomely strange rock formations, or other things to this effect, that can usually easily be explained naturally. Truthfully, I think that if God truly existed, we would never know, and there would be absolutely no proof. I, as an atheist, realized a while ago that I should stop asking for proof, because I couldn't accept anything as proof. I openly admit that. Any explanation will be more valid than something supernatural. Even other supernatural claims themselves will also be as valid as the supernatural claim of a deity. The concept of God itself is extremely hard to define. What would classify something as our God? Creating the universe, or creating us, or something else? And what other attributes does it have, or have to require to be a God? If it's both of these or more, what if God only did one of these things, and the other was a natural byproduct? If it's only one, then what if we're able to create a universe one day? Would that make us God? Probably not. So what makes God different here? I hope to explain my stance on the reason why you can't prove God on this channel in a future fully dedicated video. So, I don't know, feel free to subscribe to see it. But with that in mind, he didn't just say they have an airtight defense for God, but for Jesus being God's son as well.
Many times it seems like these people are kind of just like dodge and bob and weave bullets of rationality and reason.
Really? Because I was just going to say the same thing about theists.
And so it's left me racking my brain thinking, is there a defense? Is there an argument? Is there something we could present to these people that would make them, at the very least, pause and say, that's interesting? Whether you're an atheist, agnostic, or even Orthodox Jew who doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, I think the video you're about to watch is going to be extremely compelling.
Now that's interesting. Well, I certainly hope so anyway.
If you're a Christian, I encourage you to watch throughout the entire video, and I have a couple comments at the end I want to share. I think this is going to shift the tide in the war against skepticism.
That is a bold claim. You're bigging this video up a lot. I'm guessing you found something new here. This better be good. I hope I end up regretting what I said just a minute ago about your airtight defense. Generally, at least.
Let's watch.
The one that I investigated that absolutely blew me away the most was a woman by the name of Barbara Snyder. I interviewed Barbara at length. We have extensive medical records from her dating back many years from the Mayo Clinic and her other physicians. We have multiple credible eyewitnesses with no motive to deceive. We have two of her doctors who were so blown away by what happened to her, they wrote about it in books. Because they said, I got to write about this. This is unbelievable.
Oh my God, this sounds crazy. It's a strange start to proving God and God's Son. Sounds like Jesus has returned again. What happened to Barbara? I'm dying to know. I mean, I would not like Jesus died, but I you know what I mean.
So let me tell you what happened to Barbara.
All right, go ahead.
Barbara was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the Mayo Clinic. For the next several years, she just deteriorated, got worse and worse. She had repeated hospitalizations, repeated surgeries, until ultimately she was dying. And they put her in hospice at her home.
That's terrible. Poor Barbara. How could such an evil God do such a thing to allow that to happen? But don't worry, my guess is that God saves her and leaves some incredible proof that it did so. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to assume that God had any part to play.
So she's confined to bed at her home. One of her physicians, Dr. Harold P. Adolph, a board-certified surgeon who had performed 25,000 operations in his career. He called Barbara, quote, one of the most hopelessly ill patients I ever saw. Hopelessly ill. One of her lungs was non-functional. The other was just inflated at 50%. A tube was inserted into her neck, and oxygen was pumped from canisters in her garage so she could breathe. She'd lost control of her urination and her bowels. She was legally blind. All she could see were gray shadows. A feeding tube was inserted into her stomach. She hadn't walked in like 7 years, and so her legs had atrophied. Her muscles had shrunken, and her legs atrophied. And she was curled up like a pretzel in her bed from her illness. Her hands were...
Okay, we get it. Barbara was messed up by her condition. We don't need to overplay this. I accept what you're saying about this poor lady. I don't know for certain that it happened, but I'll accept it for the purpose nonetheless. But I'll skip the horror scene descriptions if you don't mind. Just trying to save time.
They would not try to revive her because it would just prolong her inevitable death. Well, then one day, a friend, called WMBI, which is the radio station in Chicago that's run by the Moody Bible Institute, a Christian radio station. And they said, would you announce and just ask people to pray for Barbara? Barbara's on her deathbed. Please have people pray. And we know that a minimum of 450 Christians began to pray for Barbara. How do we know? Because they sent letters telling Barbara, we're praying for you. So what happened?
I'm guessing that she survived and made a full recovery, and based on that information, you came to the logical conclusion that there is a natural explanation for this. And then exhausting all known knowledge of medical science, starting to look into things like mutants from X-Men, not literally, but people having abilities beyond usual human abilities, and maybe seeing if someone else may have healed her using abilities like this as well, or not. Maybe aliens healed her from a distance. I don't know, please tell me. Maybe I've missed something else that makes more sense than a being without spatial dimensions or a temporal dimensions, aware of all the suffering across the entire population of Earth, decided to help Barbara, of all people. But let's find out what they went with, shall we?
I'm going to let Barbara describe to you what happened next.
It was a day like any other day for me. That was one spent confined to bed, unable to breathe on my own, hooked up to machines. I heard a booming, authoritative, loud voice over my shoulder over here say, my child, get up and walk.
And there was nobody else in the room?
And there was no one else in the room, and the door was over here. There were windows over this way. And instantly, I knew it was God. But instantly, I also knew that my friends didn't hear that, which is kind of interesting, too.
Yeah.
And I needed to share with them what I heard. Well, I had this tracheostomy tube in my neck. That's how I breathed. And I had hands that did not work. So my friends said whenever I looked agitated, they knew I wanted to talk. So they'd come and plug the hole in my neck. And I said, I don't know what you're going to think about this, but God just told me to get up and walk. And as I jumped up, the first thing I remember isn't what I would think I would remember, but I jumped out of the bed and I looked and I saw my feet. They were flat on the ground, just like everyone else's, which sounds normal, but not for me. And when I did that, I jumped like this, and then I saw my hands, and they were open, and they never opened. And so now they were open, and I stood staring at them, and then it dawned on me I could see me. That's what I would have thought I would have noticed first, was my vision, but I didn't.
It was back, you could see.
It was back, I was perfectly fine. And I stood staring again for a little while, just feeling what it felt like to look at and see me. And then I turned, and that's when we were like women. We all started jumping up and down, screaming and thanking the Lord. I remember I didn't understand anything except where once I was real sick, I was well again. And it has to be God. That's all I knew.
Screw it. I did forget an option. Magic. It's more likely that Merlin from the King Arthur stories actually existed and has survived for this length of time and just so happened to be listening to that radio station than the supernatural god deciding to help Barbara but rarely ever anyone else. I'll be completely honest. The story does have books about it like it mentions, and they are doctors claiming she wasn't going to heal. Something genuinely incredible has potentially happened here, and instead of learning about what has happened, maybe to help others, are we really going to just say God did it and learn nothing? It's a wasted opportunity to learn from what happened. However, it's also the best example for me to show cherry-picking examples. One miraculous recovery, and it's God's work. Many, many devastating deaths, which would also be God's work, but we don't hear about them talking about it to prove God's case, but yet still provides the same validity. There are far more crazier things than this that can't be explained. Maybe this can be, but I don't know. Though I do explain a bit more later on and have a good idea. But we can't just fill our gaps of knowledge with God. That's how we stop science from progressing.
The next morning, she went to one of her doctors, Dr. Thomas Marshall, an internist for 30 years. And when he saw her walking toward him down the corridor, he said later, my first reaction was, oh, she died and this is a ghost. That's the only way he could account for it. His response was this, quote, this is medically impossible. Friends, God instantly and completely and astoundingly healed Barbara in one miraculous moment.
Now you see, this is interesting. The original guy wanted me to say that, probs for a different reason, I'll admit. So, a medical expert said it couldn't be natural and suggested even a ghost. I'm guessing the ghost hypothesis hasn't been tested, but instead everyone's ignoring the expert's suggestion of ghosts and are going with God instead. I just thought I should point out there are other options here, even being said to them, but no, it's obviously God. Don't get me wrong, I understand the ghost part wasn't serious, but for the exact same reason, I don't think the God part should be either.
There's no natural explanation for this. This was not some sort of spontaneous remission, which happens over a period of time, and the illness often comes back. This was instantaneous, her eyesight returning, her lungs reinflating, her entire body immediately healed. And how would you explain that voice telling her to get up and walk? This would be like a voice telling you, get up and fly.
Right, well, here I go. Whee! Well, I don't need to explain this because it'd be useless if I tried. Though walking isn't the miraculous part, is it? Because humans do walk. We don't fly. Well, unaided, I mean. The miraculous part was the healing. I'd go to the experts to explain with knowledge we already have, and if they can't, then that's amazing. Science loves learning and finding new things to explore. And an example of this is it would be the same with the crisis in cosmology, which is trying to figure out the rate at which the universe expands. Basically, we have two methods to figure this out. When we first started doing it with both methods, the results had different varying answers, but they did overlap, so we assumed the answer would be refined as time went on, with better equipment. However, that's not what happened. Instead, the answers grew further and further apart. That's the short story, but you get the point. This is something science can't explain yet. Does it mean that God is in control of it and messing with our scientists purely for its own amusement? I very much doubt it. We need to let the experts deal with it, figure out where the problem lies, and find the answer. I'd rather hear, I don't know, until then, instead of being given a false answer. If this is the revolutionary evidence against atheists, I am severely disappointed. There are many stories similar to this, but it doesn't compare to the prayers that go unanswered.
And you'd say, well, I can't do that. That's how wild it was for her. Say, get up and walk after all these years. And yet she heard that. How do you explain that? Well, the illness has never come back today. This happened more than 30 years ago. I have never witnessed anything like this before or since, and considered it a rare privilege to observe the hand of God performing a true miracle.
This quote being quoted directly from the doctor made me a little suspicious. I don't normally simply dismiss or discredit stories and like to just assume the information given to me is true. For the purposes of the arguments at least anyway, this is the best way I can represent what they say is by assuming what they say is true and still addressing it that way and saying it doesn't prove God. Unless I'm wrong, of course. And that would be fine too. But it has to stay within the realms of our four-dimensional universe because nothing based in reality would prove God anyway, and that's how I've treated it so far. But the claim that these are experts, and I'm sure they are expert doctors, but I'm guessing not medically scientific experts, as God wouldn't have been an answer for them. The quote made me suspicious because it sounds like the doctor already believed in a God, and while seemed to be thrilled by witnessing the hand of God. So I wanted to look into this further. There doesn't seem to be a lot of coverage, admittedly, for something 30 years ago, but still, a miraculous recovery like this, I would still expect some sort of global coverage in some way. In my search, I found a biased answer. Biased against me, but honest. This came from a theist who had already looked into it. The original post. They probably think that it never happened. Her story wasn't reported by any news source. The only place you can find evidence of her is from websites looking for hits and authors trying to sell books. I'm not an atheist, I'm a person of faith, so I wanted to believe in her story, but I can't find any non-biased evidence of it happening. I assume atheists feel that this is an urban legend, but I can't find any evidence to prove them wrong. Can you? Commenter. You mentioned that you don't think there is proof from anyone who isn't biased. The article below references an image of both the hospital medical reports from the case and the news article that looks to be from the time. Original poster. Is the medical report purposely blurred beyond the ability to read it? And regarding the even more unreadable newspaper article, what newspaper is it from? It's ironic that I asked for clear evidence and all you found was the blurriest of images. If these images are legitimate, someone must have access to them to scan a high quality, i.e. readable, version. I also looked into the website that was linked by the commenter, and for some reason, the commenter thought a Christian-based website was unbiased here. The OP wanted proof to atheists that the story actually happened, and couldn't find any themselves. Now, I'm not saying that it didn't happen, but if it did, it has a surprisingly lack of supporting evidence. But let's hear what the original guy thinks, as we haven't heard from him much yet.
Man, this is such a powerful testimony. So often in philosophical or even historical arguments, debates, conversations, people can wiggle their way out of, well, I just don't know. But there is no escaping, no wiggling out of what happens to Barbara. Oftentimes we also hear the argument, well, it's just a little headache that gets healed, or it's just a little backache, or this or that. But in this case, it's a serious medical condition. Oftentimes with the serious medical conditions, the stories of those will say, well, it's not corroborated. They never went and got checked up by the doctor. In this case, it's actually medically verified. In Lee Strobel's books, the person who wrote this book, Case for Miracles, he has documented many other medically verified miracles corroborated by medical professionals. We're going to be reviewing several of these on the channel because I honestly think this is the way forward. That evangelism was never meant to be pontificating philosophical thoughts. I am eternally grateful for the work of William Lane Craig and other people, Dr. Turek, others who have pioneered in this space, but I seriously think we are misguided in our approach. Yes, we need the pontification, the philosophy, but we also need a demonstration of power. Let me read to you a verse from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians. This is 1 Corinthians 2.
I'm good, thanks. But if any of my viewers want it, he was kind enough to also put it across the entirety of the screen. He's been going on about atheists dodging, ducking, dipping, diving, and dodging the question. And yes, I said dodging twice, because it's important. However, I am happy to say, I don't know. I'm not a medical expert. But I fail to see how this demonstrates God. Even if I completely accept everything you say, even the voice of God that she hears, I just don't think the voice came from God. If I take it seriously though, it's going to be that she heard a voice and that she healed. None of this demonstrates a God. And I had to believe that Muhammad was being given messages/visions from God before he could then prove God. Now, despite the obvious flaw in that argument, I didn't believe, but I could accept that Muhammad saw visions of the future. Why not? Who knows, maybe he could. I can accept all the claims to be true, barring a spaceless and timeless being that did it. Partly because for all of these, it is equally likely that the devil did it. Or in Islam's case, Iblis. Jumping to God, a being that apparently nobody can comprehend, is a big jump from reality. A rational explanation of some sort, but not only that, a much greater and deeper jump into the supernatural as well. And I mean that with the greatest of respect. Supernatural meaning beyond nature, the unexplainable, the uncomprehendable. Many gods fit the bill, but also many creatures of these many stories could also have the ability to do so. The most unbelievable thing here truly is the jump to God.
If you look through the Gospels, through the New Testament, through the book of Acts, you will see a common theme. When the gospel is needing to break into a new area. It needs to break into unbelief or skepticism. The number one tool used by the apostles, used by Jesus Christ himself, and all the disciples and the followers of the way was a simple one. It was signs, wonders, and miracles.
So basically anything unexplained we can attribute to God. And when something becomes explainable, it no longer matters in this regard. So basically it's a way to keep moving the goalposts of what God actually has a hand in.
But I'll say this, and I'll end with this. We know it from all these videos on YouTube of these apologists going to campuses and giving this great defense for the faith. And some maybe turn, but many say, uncompelling. Why? It's because anybody can deny an argument, but nobody argues with an empty wheelchair. Take a skeptic, place them in front of a miracle, a real miracle.
Okay, take a theist, place them in front of that skeptic that you placed in front of a miracle, and get them to answer one question. How does this connect to God? See the theist answer, because I'm sure that they will. I don't know what they'll say, but I guarantee that it won't connect to God. Partly because God is unprovable, but also because it's not just God they're trying to connect it to, but their specific version of God.
And they are happening today. For the skeptic out there, that you've never seen this and you're wondering whether maybe you're an atheist, agnostic, undecided, maybe you're an Orthodox Jew and you don't know if Jesus is the Son of God. You should ask yourself, yes, did Jesus really exist? One of the great ways you can ask yourself is the claims that Christ made. He makes this claim in John 14 that his followers would be able to do certain miraculous supernatural things. Not on command, but it will be happening in their life from time to time. So here's a great way to debunk Christianity. Has there been supernatural, unexplained healings, things happening around Christians? Do the research for yourself. See if it's out there.
Well, that's not going to prove anything, is it? Proving that unexplained things happen to Christians doesn't prove Christianity if I can also provide unexplainable things about other religions, or non-religious people. Lazarus syndrome. I'll admit the name comes from Christianity, but it doesn't just affect Christians. This phenomena, where a patient is declared dead but suddenly regains blood flow, no offense to Barbara, her miraculous healing is astonishing if true, but come on. People coming back from the dead is a greater mystery. I wonder what you would think it would take for me to believe in God. I'm an atheist that's open to the possibility, but I truly believe there will never be any evidence, or at least none enough to prove such a grand claim. The arguments for God have argued it out of existence. I'm not just saying that like this guy did at the beginning. As we learn more and more, the experience of God has been reduced to voices in people's heads, and that God is timeless and spaceless, in an effort to stop people disproving the idea. But this also puts God in such a place that any evidence for it is also impossible, without almost any other option becoming so incredibly more likely. Let me know if I'm wrong here, and after you've done that, there are 2 more videos on screen right now, and if you're interested, click on one, and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.